And what this means is when you walk around and you just come into contact with other people, you start changing them. You start actually getting their field in line with your field. By you just being in coherence, you walk around making other people better and helping them to get better and helping them to heal. I can think of nothing more rewarding than the fact that just by my pure existence alone, I am helping other people and making other people happier. So that's why I continue to do the shadow work.
Welcome to the Hard Part. Our guest today, a Neo-Shaman Shadow Work Facilitator who has deeply impacted many lives. Most importantly, he is someone with a big heart, my big brother and my old friend. Welcome, Domenic Weber.
Thank you, Fiona. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here today. Are you in Oregon right now? How's everything going?
Yep, just in Oregon, completing my shaman shack that I'm building in the backyard. I built my own studio. So in the final process of that. So I got my own little studio in the backyard, a nice little garden area. So yeah.
Wow. Congrats. I definitely want to check that out whenever I pass by Oregon sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I set up a whole container around it. It's got a permanent container, and so we'll see how that goes. Crystals in the ground, buried, all kinds of things. Yeah.
Wow, that would be amazing. I wanted to get into more of that, like what are you doing currently? But what's your life before you walk on this spiritual path?
It's interesting because when I look back at my life, I honestly can say with surety that everything led up to this point for a reason. I actually started out, let's just say it's a funny thing, going a long time back, but in high school, I failed English class and then I got an F because I was pretty much high every day or something like that. And I had to retake it. The next year I retook it, I fell in love with this teacher. Not I fell in love with the teacher, but he taught me about critical thinking and philosophy. So I went from getting an F in that class to getting an A plus like 103 in the class. I got straight A's through senior year. And I went into school of philosophy. I went to St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we studied very in-depth critical thinking and using dialogue and what's called the dialectic to grow your mind. And it was great. Except by the time of 4 years of philosophy, I was so sick of philosophy because I was so sick of not having answers, like all these questions and you could never know the answers. So I knew I learned that I'd love teaching and I've always wanted to be an educator. So I went and got my master's in education, but I got it with an endorsement in physics. So I got something science that I can bite my teeth into and have a correct answer. And there's no arguing with that answer, which is hilarious because I learned basically later on that we know in physics, everything we know about physics got thrown out the window when we discovered quantum physics. So, there is no actual right answer. But fast forward, I went on this path of being in physics, a science teacher, but then that brought me into becoming an engineer, where I was an engineer for 6 or 7 years. And that's when I first discovered like a spiritual path. This is like 2008. I started reading about something, called the law of attraction. And so that kind of took me down this path where I started to see a little bit more things. And it was actually Burning Man that I went to in 2010 or 11, where things just completely started to change. And ended up quitting my job. I was a partner in the engineering firm, quitting my job to pursue a more noble causes, but then struggled for 10 years. 10 years I struggled trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And one thing I always was a snowboard instructor, which we have in common. And so I actually got the job. I eventually got to the point where I was director of a ski school here in Oregon called Hoodoo, a little tiny ski area. And I was I've been snowboarding and I've been an instructor for 28 years now. But even then, during my final kind of year, something was missing and something was empty. And fortunately, I've always also known, you don't even know this, Fiona, we didn't talk about this, but I've always known I wanted to start a school. I've always known that since 2010, when I first had what I would call my first spiritual experience. I wanted to start a school. And I knew it was going to be a school that was different because I hated the traditional education system. The idea of taking a standardized test that somehow proves that you know things made zero sense. That's not how the real world works. So I was going to start a school, and after being at hoodoo, I just felt a little empty, and an opportunity came forward to start a school. So I left hoodoo. I resigned from my cushy job to start Scorpion Creek Ranch with Katie Brown. Scorpion Creek Ranch is a new type of school that we're opening for homeless teens in Eugene. And Eugene, if you don't know, has the highest homeless rate in the country per capita. Of the entire country. There is more homeless people per capita here than anywhere else in the country. So we are starting a school for homeless teens, and I'm doing everything differently as far as education. It's project-based learning. They're going to learn how to cook, and they're going to learn how carpentry and electrical and how to paint and real life skills that they can go and take into the real world. You know, they can learn how to do spreadsheets. They can learn math through these different ways. They can learn about marketing and writing and finance, but they're not going to take a math class, and they're not going to take a social studies class or an English class. That's just not the way the real world works. We don't do that. So simultaneously with this, when I quit my job, I'm like, okay, what am I because we don't have funding yet. So I quit my job without funding. And I kind of stumbled upon this thing on this webinar from another mentor of mine, a previous mentor by the name of Satyan Raja, who, he was on a thing called On God's Payroll. And it was a bunch of, higher spiritual people that were, doing great work. And there was this guy, Christoph Melchizedek. And I was just like, I knew about kind of what Melchizedeks were from Junpilo Melchizedek and some others. So I was like, I'm going to listen to this guy. And I started listening to him, and I was like, there's something different about this. There's something interesting that's captivating me and holding me. And so within 3 months, I was signed up to become, a Neo-Shaman student. And I've known since the first week in that class that this was the right move. And this is what everything has been for, because we took all the missing pieces of my philosophy. Like, it's great. You think about all these things, you have these critical thinking skills, but there's no embodiment. There's nothing in the body. Everything's in the mind. They talk about all these things and they want to think about, but we aren't minds. We're not brains walking around or floating around. We're humans with the ability to feel, to speak, to breathe, to all of these different things. And so I knew that the philosophy of especially Western philosophy was just always missing these critical pieces. And as soon as Christoph started talking about embodiment and understanding that everything lives inside you and it has to be part of you, and there is no mental side and spiritual side and physical side, there's one being that is you. And, that's how I knew I had stumbled upon, I guess in some ways, stumbled upon truth. And a knowing, I have a deep knowing of what I'm doing more than I've ever had in my life.
Wow. There are so many things I wanted to touch on, definitely throughout your life journey, but can I start from the beginning? It seems like you mentioned that you went to Burning Man and you started to quit your job and do everything other than what your previous life did. Can you share that experience of what's the trigger? What did you do there?
I actually wrote about this in an essay that when we ended up in New Zealand together, that essay. Burning Man gave me the first experience, I think, of my life where I actually passionately felt. Being raised the way that I was raised, like a lot of males, we're taught to suppress our feelings and not have feelings, and feelings are for wussies, and you got to stand up and be a man and all of that stuff. And that's the same thing I was taught. And I went out to Burning Man and I felt passionately about something. I looked at art and I was just in awe. The emotion of awe that I'd had maybe once or twice in my life, it was like a repeated experience of awe over and over and over again. And I realized that there's got to be more to life than whatever I was experiencing. And so that kind of, it put me down this path of wanting to help other people. But the problem was at that time is I could barely help myself. So that's why it took 10, 15 years of stumbling to figure my own stuff out before I could really start to help anyone else.
The reason why I wanted to ask your experience in Burning Man is because there are so many rumors about Burning Mans of, like being very expensive and everything is like chaotic. I'm not sure whether it's like that when you were there because it's been a while. And with years and times, things shifted. So I'm not sure whether it's like a stereotype that all these other people talk about, or it's like what's going on there. Like, what did you actually experience?
Think about it like anything else. The media is trying to do their job, and they're trying to be sensational, and they're trying to be the most outrageous thing they possibly can to get your attention. Everyone is competing for your attention. So they want to show you the most ridiculous, the most outrageous, the most offensive, anything that will get you. They don't care if they get you in a rage or they get you elated, as long as they get your eyes looking at what they're talking about. So it's going to be over sensationalized. At the same time, I had my first burn, and I've been 10 times now, and I'm going this year. I'm going to be doing shadow work facilitation. I'm going to be doing shadow work groups and facilitation at Burning Man this year. But that first year, my mind was blown repeatedly every single day. And you talk to most people that go, they're going to tell you probably something along the lines of the same thing. Go to Instagram and look at that. You're going to see what we call the most blatant and utter forms of mimic on the planet. It is the most artificial and mundane and just mediocre thing that you could possibly imagine. But people from the outside are looking in at these girls posing on Instagram and all this stuff, and they're thinking, "Oh, that's Burning Man." That's garbage. That's just not what Burning Man is at all. In fact, you can't. I have a tattoo on my hand, which is actually, this is the 10th principle of Burning Man, which is called immediacy. And this immediacy means the direct lived experience of the now, is the best way I can put it. So if you want to try to look at Burning Man through a video or some girl that's posing, and if she's out there posing and looking at a camera, she's not living. She's not in a direct experience. That's all fake.
So can you share like one particular experience or example that you feel like, oh wow, this is mind blowing, and this is probably the reason why I have this tattoo?
Oh boy. Um,
Just one.
there's I'll share one that it's probably not the best, but oh man, I'll do it anyway. So one night, like the first year, I think it was the first year at Burning Man. Yeah, there's these massive dust storms, and there was like like a kid's geodome, like that you play on, kids play and crawl around on a playground. Somebody had put one of those up out, and they'd filled it full of yoga balls, like the big giant yoga balls. And the idea was is you could like drop down and land on the yoga balls. And of course, somebody broke their arm inside there, so they had to shut it down eventually. But we're out in the middle of the desert with me and my friends, and this is huge dust storm, and one of these big giant balls just blows into our existence, kind of just, it's all dust. You can't see anything, and all of a sudden this big yoga ball. So we start kicking this yoga ball like 30 to 40 yards back and forth down, like running through, and we end up at this crowd at what many people will know is called Robot Heart, and and we get to it, and I was a soccer player, and I just take this ball and I just kick this thing, and it curves and it goes down, and it lands right in the middle of the crowd, and all my friends freak out and run away like the cops are going to come and get us. And anyway, the ball was picked up and people started playing around with it, but it was just like, it's just the and that's how I got my original name for Burning Man, which was Why Bunny Wet, because they were like, you don't know how easily you can hurt people because of your size, because I'm 6'4", 200 pounds, and Why Bunny Wet's a reference to my friend T. Nate gave me that because the Hulk is like petting this little tiny bunny with his thumb, and he smashes the bunny's head, and Hulk says, "Why Bunny Wet?" So they gave me that name in honor of that, which is kind of how I got my name. But
Of your big
it is.
size.
But there's an interesting thing going on when we talk about the process of manifestation at Burning Man, and when we talk about morphogenic fields, which that I know that I'm going off the deep end into the shamanism already, but what happens is you have so many people collectively thinking about these same things that reality actuates and happens almost instantaneously out there. And we saw this at conscious growth convergence too, in some ways, when you were there.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
so, it's like all of a sudden a dust storm comes in and you're like, I need shelter. And all of a sudden this place in front of you appears and it gives you this perfect shelter. And then you end up meeting these people inside that you would have never met. And you end up having a really good time and connection. And then you hang out with them for several days and then become your friends for life. And it's like, and that's an actual thing that happens. So that's why I bring it up that way. And it's just like the magic that actually happens out there is phenomenal, and it actually, I'd say my very last burn, I didn't go last year. I went the year before. I went to a workshop on men's work, and I started reading David Data, and I started reading some other things about men's work. And that's actually what led me to Neo-Shamanism, was my last workshop at Burning Man that I did, because there's some really cool, people doing amazing workshops. I'm part of a new camp this year called Naked Heart. We're based out of Eugene, but we are a workshop camp. We put on tons and tons of workshops, and it's life-changing for people that come out there and go through these workshops. And so it's actually, I went through a workshop on men's work, and and that led me to where I'm at today. So even from my first burn to my last burn, Burning Man has been shaping my whole entire reality.
You mentioned that the men's work, like in men's circle and facilitating, right? I feel like as you were sharing your experience of men being suppressed with your emotion, I feel like a lot of people would resonate with that. And I feel like from me observing a lot of either my dad or men in my life, they're having the similar problem. Can you share a little bit more on your experience even in that workshop, or how you become like discovering that, it is maybe rooted deeply in men?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things. So it's an interesting avenue that we've moved into the shadow work through this question. So I'm putting out 4 articles. I've actually already put out the first one just the other day, which is the father wound in men. And this is all of us, we're raised with 2 parents, or if you're not, then you have an absentee parent, which is basically the same thing as what it turns out. I'll explain in a little bit, but we have 2 parents, and they mean the best of intentions when they're raising us. They don't know what the hell they're doing most of the time either. You have to remember that. And so they will end up creating in each one of us what's called your mother will create the mother wound, and your father will create the father wound. And the first article I wrote just the other day is the father wound in men. And what it talks about is that, really I'm talking about what we call the wounded masculine, or the toxic patriarchy. You can call it whatever you want. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years, since the times of the Sumerians and Egyptians. It actually goes back farther than that. I won't go into the crazy magic part of things on this, and we don't have to talk about that. But everyone knows that patriarchy's been damaging the show for the last 2,000 to 4,000 years. That's kind of a given. And it goes back to what we call the wounded masculine. And we have, 2 different types of fathers. You either have a hostile and aggressive father, or an absent, kind of just neglectful father. And what this does is this produces 2 different types of things in men. It produces father rage, where you rebel against society, you rebel against authority, you toughen up, you harden up, you put on armor so that no one can hurt you and nothing can get through. That's a lot of men. That was me. I had, the aggressive father. I had the aggressive, hostile father. And or you have the completely absent father, who never showed their son what protection looks like, never showed them guidance, never showed them reassurance, never showed them what healthy masculinity was or is. And so they end up with this desire they end up uninitiated males, and they end up afraid of being in society. They end up afraid of the hostile men because that's not something they've experienced. So they live in hiding. And what do they do as well? Well, they put on armor to protect themselves, or they stay away. So we get these 2 forms, either from hostile or absentee fathers, from neglectful fathers, we get men who put armor on and create this complete facade that everything's fine and everything's okay, or that I'm tough and I can do everything. And and having feelings is a weakness because I have to be the man and be protective and all of this stuff. It doesn't matter which wound you come from. Most men do end up the same with this idea of, feelings are bad. Vulnerability that's the one I'm working on. Vulnerability is a weakness, and you're going to die if you show these things, because that's not the man way. And this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, and we're finally at the point where we're stopping and saying, wait, what? Why is that the way? And we're finally questioning the way, as it's not the Mandalorian. This is not the way. It's essentially what we're learning. So that's kind of how we get to the point where we are right now.
And actually, I wanted to echo back when you're saying the father wound with the avoidance. My father was actually like that, where he would just neglect the problem and just not talk about it until the problem is right in front of his face. He was still being like, these people are just, they didn't know that much, and I know the all. And he would just persuade himself over thinking he is the one who know and everyone doesn't know, and putting that into a sugar coat of how he is. And I feel like a lot of people, they still have this kind of problem, even though maybe they are aware of it. Just like you said, even though you are aware of it, you're still working on it. So what's next for this one?
It's interesting that you said that he concluded that this is the way he is. When a lot of people say that, and that's really what shadow work comes down to. Shadow work comes down to understanding that there is no such thing as this is the way we are. That is what we call an imprinted program that you've been running since birth. So what's interesting is that, he said this, and the very first thing we do in shadow work is we say, why does he think that he is right and everyone else is wrong? What is driving that idea, that behavior? What is the fear behind that? Like, in other words, if he's wrong, what happens, right? That's what shadow work does. Shadow work asks you to say, okay, where did I get this belief that, if I'm not, that I am right and everyone else is wrong? Because if I don't believe that, then I will die. That's where shadow work takes place. And that, that can happen in men's work, but it can also very much happen for females. It's just, in men's work, it's allowing men to finally let their guard down and ask these types of questions. Females tend to be much more willing to and open and vulnerable to ask these types of questions. Men's work is just, it's the same thing, but it's creating a space where they can do that, where they can let their guard down, and perhaps they feel safer with other men. And healing with other men is actually very important. So, that's where we get to the driving. And I don't want to analyze your father too much, but that's a very common thing, to say is like,
No,
oh,
please feel free. I feel like a lot of people, they probably have the same problem, and like I would probably cut it out to share with other people.
So then you have to look at, well, how did his father raise him? And I bet you the answer to that question on why did he adopt this mindset of I'm right and everyone else is wrong, because his father instilled in him something to that effect. His father instilled into him, like you said, he was more of the absentee father. He was more of the neglectful father. You said he's not aggressive. He was very passive. So his father was very much probably the same way. And what that meant was that he did not receive the care and compassion and protection of true masculinity from his father. So he grew up learning how to do it all on his own and be all by himself, and that there was no one coming, and that he had to do it all on his own. And that was the armor that he created. He created that armor of like, there's no one else out there. I have to do this all on my own. And so he approached life with, I have to do this all on my own. Therefore, what I'm saying is right and everyone else is wrong. And that's how you get into that entire cycle of it's just perpetuated through generation. And he took on the armor of I have to do it because no one else is going to. I am right and everyone else is wrong, and that is the only way I will survive. So when we can dismantle that logic and realize that we will survive, in fact we will actually be better and thrive when we can undo that mindset, that's the work of the shadow work.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that is actually coming from generations. I feel like the dynamic between my grandfather and my grandmother, which is my dad's mom and parent, like their parents, is pretty much the same dynamic between my parents, like their original. So I feel like this is really important part to, it seems like to look at the childhood and to look at our parents. It's a similar way as how therapy usually talk about it, but can you explain a little bit deeper on the shadow work? Like, what is the difference? What's essentially the concept of shadow work, and what is the difference between how therapy says go back to your childhood and all that?
So there's a couple different aspects here. With the word shadow work comes from it's a Jungian term where we are essentially trying to look at the parts of us that we cannot see, and by looking at those parts, the way Christoph puts it, that your pain is your medicine and your wounds become your wisdom, is how he puts it best. That when we can actually illuminate our shadows and we don't get rid of our shadows, we transmute our shadows. When we can confront these parts of ourselves and understand why we made the decisions we made, what we call brilliant defense mechanisms. Shadows are brilliant defense mechanisms that helped us stay alive, but they kept running long after we needed them, and they ended up forming our lives. At first, the way I always put, a lot of shadows is that shadow work is the dismantling of the cage that you built around you. Because you first put the cage up, it wasn't a cage. It was a set of barriers to protect you. But that same set of barriers then enclosed you. And now you're in a cage and you're stuck in this cage, and you simply say things like, this is just the way I am. And then shadow work allows you to just dismantle that cage completely. And that's shadow work in and of itself. What we do from a neo-shamanic perspective is that we have different levels that we work on as well. We have what's called you have your physical level, your health, your diet, your exercise, things of that. Then you have that shadow work level, what we call the personal psychological level. That's dealing with, like you said, talking about your children, you're talking about your childhood, talking about, the things your parents did to you. And that's why I said, remember, it's like you mentioned, it's like your parents meant the best. They just didn't have a better way of doing anything. And where this goes deeper, when we get into what we call the energetic psychology, this is where neo-shamanism starts to deviate, and our shadow work deviates from everything else out there, is that we look at your chakras and your energy centers and how these are affected by what happens very early on. So from 0 to 7, which is the time that you can't remember, you don't have memories from that time, you are like a sponge for emotions, and you can feel the emotions of your parents, and they're coming into you. So if your parents were fighting during that time, if your dad was really apathetic and docile and depressed, you're going to pick that up and feel that. And you're not going to know why that you feel, apathetic, and how you got your father wound from your dad being so quiet and reserved and not really ever expressing his feelings and shutting his feelings down and feeling bad about it, or feeling depressed and you're going to pick all that up. You're going to feel it. And it's going to become part of you. It's going to become part of your father wound. Same with your mother. If your mother, for my example and mine, my father was an alcoholic. And so he drank himself into a rage almost every single night. So I developed father rage because I had a very hostile and aggressive father before I even could talk. I got these imprints because that energy comes through our chakra system. And my mother, was not really paying attention to me at that much because she was so busy dealing with my dad, dealing with other kids, whatever. She turned to the church. She turned to God. God was far more important than I ever was. In fact, Catholic guilt and stuff. She says, you should be humble. You shouldn't even think about yourself. You should only be thinking about God. Funny how she never really thought about helping other people. But, and so I developed this, what we call mother hunger, because I had an absentee mother. And so before I was the age of 7, I had these wounds installed in me because your chakra system is open and your chakras take in all this energy, and then you have to figure out how to survive. You do whatever you need to do to figure out how to survive. And, without going too deep, of course, we could, but going into what every single chakra does and how you process that energy as it comes through, how those emotions come through and how they affect every single chakra differently, that's a lot. That's a lot to go into. But what we do in neo-shamanism is we don't just look at your history of your past, of your mother and your father. We look at your chakra diagnostic map and understand what was going on and how it's currently being processed to this day, and how you're reliving the same patterns that you have been in your entire life, and it's showing up in your chakras, which is why we start there with chakra diagnostics. And then we can kind of look at things, understand where you're coming from. And most people that I've been handing, the reports to after I do it, they're like, wow, I did not know all of this about me was going on. And it's amazing that you picked all this up simply by reading my chakras. And I'm like, yeah, that's because, this is the energetic level. This is, like I said, this is what philosophy was missing. My Western philosophy is why I said I created embodied education, because it's about embodying your whole entire being. It's not about your mind. It's not just about your physical health. It's about your emotional, your energetic, your physical, your mental. They're all one thing that you are embodying.
Before getting into too deep of the energetic level, I wanted to quickly summarize that. So basically, shadow work is really about like conscious and unconscious level. So facing the shadow work is more of facing that unconscious level. Would you say that in a way?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's making the first step in shadow work is making the unconscious conscious, is becoming aware of your shadows. And the easiest way to do that is simply to say, what triggers you? The easiest one for me to do is like go to your brothers and sisters or go to your mom and your dad and pick out one instance. And we did this, Fiona, we did this with your mom. Pick out
Yeah.
one instance where they said something and you just got pissed off, or you got sad and you started crying and you got upset. I'm like, okay, that's a trigger. Now, what is it that they said? And then you say, now, why did that trigger you? And that's the hard question to answer, but that's what the shadow work is. That's why it's not easy, but that's why it helps to have someone to work with, a shadow work facilitator, because they can see the parts of you that you can't, and they can guide you to that awareness. And that's why you work with other people. You work with a guide because they can kind of see, well, do you see this and do you see that? And you're like, oh, okay, that does make sense. Now you have awareness, and that's the first step, is you have awareness. I do want to say one caveat on that, is that when we get into talking about triggers, I studied cognitive behavioral therapy, not like professionally. I've been in self-help since 2008, 7. And I had a mentor at the time by the name of Devlin Steele, who taught me about cognitive behavioral therapy even back then. And cognitive behavioral therapy is the concept is great. It's cool. It's nice. You have a trigger. That trigger makes you have a thought. That thought then drives you to have a behavior. That behavior is usually unhealthy. So what cognitive behavioral therapy does is it says, know what your trigger is, identify your trigger, and then take the thought and throw it out and put a new thought in. So you put a new thought in, so a new behavior is finally done. That's great. What shadow work does is it erases the trigger forever. There is no more trigger.
In an energetic level.
And yeah, at a physical level, in an energetic level, an emotional level, a spiritual level, the trigger is gone. You will never have the trigger again. And you've felt this firsthand, that your mother does not trigger you the same way anymore because you've done shadow work. And you can now sit there and listen to her and just know exactly where you would have used to been and how it would have used to piss you off and how it would have upset you. And now you just look at it and go, yeah, that's what she's saying. That's happening right now. But the trigger's gone. You didn't have to replace the thought after the trigger. We got rid of the trigger completely. That's shadow work.
Well, there are so many, again, so many questions I wanted to ask, but can I just throw it out there and then see how much you can answer it? So first of all, like I feel like when I get into shadow work, it's really frustrated how, like just like therapy, going into therapy, they always ask you about your childhood and your parents and all that. And the reason why I didn't want to, before I go to the root initiation, the reason why I didn't want to do the shadow work is because, damn, I need to open up, look at my whole childhood, look at my parents, and it's like feels like never ends. It is a frustration. I feel like a lot of people nowadays they face the same problem as well, and. What's your take on that? And I have another one is that I want to feedback on how we done the energetic work of that shadow work and how it turns out in my real life. I feel like the process of that, it's definitely, I feel like it's changed dramatically that I don't even need to think about how I should think about at this time when that situation triggered me. But then I feel like there are times that where I need to take action, be aware, take a step back of knowing that, oh, this is the situation right now, and to be more center of myself. And that takes time. And what's your experience on that? For me, if you care, I explain my situation right now is that I told you that I solved my mother problem after that root initiation. Well, after my root initiation, I still talk to my mom, and my mom still talk about the same thing of you gotta get married, you gotta have a kids and all that. At some point it still triggers me a little bit. But for some reason, I was able to, be aware of myself a little bit more. And I feel like I done a therapy onto myself, realizing that what is that main trigger and resistance of, her message behind her, like her demand or her comments on wanting me to be a certain way. But where is she coming from? And finally I saw that, so that love, she is actually coming from love of not wanting me to be alone for the rest of my life, and wanting me to have someone to help me to take care of myself when I get older. And that love really solved that problem, being able to see the love behind her, and not only to know that and to really feel that is a progress that I wouldn't say that after that initiation or restructuring chakra, that's instantly gone. So what's your experience on that? And
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, well, that's a lot. So a couple different things, like I said, your pain becomes your medicine. Your wounds become your wisdom. This is not easy work. It can be very painful. It's painful to pull up your shadows and confront them. It's scary and it's painful, but when you come out the other side, you know it's worth it. It's so worth it. You are a completely different person. And this is what we call true sovereignty. Like, this term is being thrown around a lot more nowadays. It's becoming somewhat of a buzzword. But until you experience sovereignty, it's hard to really talk about. And what I mean is that, like you just said, your mom can say anything she wants now, and you have the total choice to react how you want to. You are not triggered by her. That means that you are truly free. That means that you are not running a program anymore, and you're not reacting. You are making the conscious choice to live your reality how you want to. That is true sovereignty, and that's what shadow work delivers. Is it easy to get to? No, it can be painful. And I will say the exact same thing happened for me. Mine was during the root. I asked my father. My father's been passed since 2009, but that doesn't matter. So I was, we were talking to him anyway. And it was the same thing. I was like, why were you such a freaking asshole to me, And like, why? And he said, I was just trying to show you love the best way I could. And when he said that to me, it's making me teary eyed now. Like I broke down. And I realized, I was like, yeah, that's what he was shown before him and his father, and they were just trying to survive, and he was just doing what he showed me allowed him to survive. And and that was it. And so moving forward, it's just like the compassion, and it's things like this. That isn't what we call an energetic block and release. That is a dam that was up around something, and when we can break through that dam, boom, the floodgates open, and you will never be the same. And it takes a long time to get to one of those dams and see one of those dams, but then finally when we can get to it and we can clear that block, we're forever changed. And it's extremely painful to get there. It's very hard. You may have, your whole life may need to crumble in certain ways. Your whole reality about what you think is important and what you think isn't, the values that you have may fall away. A great example as well is I had another client where I was talking about how when you root yourself in family values, that your family is the most important thing, you're just setting yourself up to suffer for the rest of your life. And he got really upset with me for saying that, because when you rely on other people like your family to define your happiness, you aren't free, you aren't sovereign. And he was like, he kind of took offense to that, and he was really angry with me for saying that. And then a year later he came back and he goes, I totally get what you're saying now. He's like, he'd realized that his family had been driving his behavior, and he wasn't happy with his life, and he had to have his life fall apart in certain ways in order for him to get to the point where he was like, yeah, I was defining my happiness by thinking that if I'm the good son and I do this for them, and I'm the caregiver and I hold them and I help them, that they will reward me and they'll be there for me. And then they weren't, and then I was miserable. And he was like, by getting rid of that idea that all these painful things had to happen to him for him to become free. And he's, is he at the end of it? No. Are we any of them at the end of it? No. The way Christoph puts it, I think it's funny. He's like, oh, you rip the Band-Aid off and then you see another Band-Aid underneath. And I'm like, yep, that's kind of how it is. There's just another Band-Aid underneath. So it keeps going. Does it get easier? Yeah. There's no more, I ripped the Band-Aid off and there's no more hair there. So at least it's a little less painful. Over time, there's different things. But then you also, this is a long answer because you gave a long question. Then you talked about, you hit upon something else. Your mom was just doing what she thought was best for you because that's what she was raised with. So then we have the question of what we call ancestral karma and family karma, and these ideas that were passed down through generation to generation, and then ultimately we get stuck with. This is part of what we call, this is the final piece of neo-shamanism that very much deviates from traditional psychology, is what we call soul psychology. And that is the idea of a karmic load and a karmic debt that you inherit from your family and from your ancestors. In no way, shape, or form did you want that. Actually, you did. You signed up for it. But in no way, shape, or form did you create it in your life. It was just handed to you. But what the amazing thing about that is you can then resolve it for your entire family lineage, going back centuries and for generations and generations and moving forward. You become what's called the genetic liberator of your family when you're handed karmic debt from your family, and then transmute it. You transmute that shadow, that family shadow, not your personal shadow, but that shadow that's been stalking your lineage for generations. You free your entire family for good. And you're changing, and that's truly changing the world and raising us back to Christ consciousness.
Beautiful said, and beautiful experience of unpeeling our childhood trauma or things between our parents. Even though I feel like we solve it right now. You were just talking about it. I can just feel that deep transmutation of from rage to love. It's incredible, beautiful. Talking about rage, that I feel like a lot of people it is especially men, the way they accumulate trauma eventually become a rage reaction. I remember that was one of the issues for you that you have to solve as well. Can you share more of that, like personal experience of yourself? Because like I feel like a lot of men would resonate with that. Like they would feel that unexplainable rage coming out of nowhere whenever they get triggered. They don't even feel sad or grief or whatever. They just, the first emotion is rage. Yeah, angry.
Well, I say this a lot in shadow work. Anger and so first, what's the difference between anger and rage? What's interesting is I think we call it father rage, but I honestly think it's more anger. Anger is it's the final straw. It's actually a defense mechanism. We get angry and we have rage because there's actually an emotion before it, right? So we talk about shadow work. We peel back the layers of the onion. So on the outside of the onion is rage and anger. And when we peel that back, we realize that there's a deeper, more powerful emotion underneath. Usually it's fear. So right underneath rage, the reason you're getting rageful is because you're afraid of something. And rage is the defense mechanism to protect whatever you're afraid of. But then if you can peel back the fear, you might see grief or shame or guilt. And then if you can peel that back, you're going to see yet another layer. And that's why this is so hard, is because you have to peel back all these layers. And what we see in society today is a bunch of men trying to protect themselves with their armor. They've created this armor and they want to protect themselves. And the number one protection mechanism is rage. And I think, like all emotions, it has a purpose, and the only differential I'll make between rage and anger, and I think it's more anger than rage. Rage is just unbridled, with no purpose whatsoever. Like the way I put it is, when I feel rage, it's actually when I've tapped into my wounded feminine, and I want to burn it all down. When I feel anger, it's much more directed at a particular person or cause or thing, because anger, in the words, John O'Donohue is an Irish poet, has a series of like these audiobooks called Vibration of the Eternals, and in it he talks about how anger gives us a type of clarity. So when you're in a kind of state of not knowing what to do and you become angry, you know very much what you want. So anger isn't always bad. Anger can be a very healthy emotion, right? Especially, we've seen a lot of rising up against the patriarchy and a lot of anger and rage. And that's the problem, is the rage is not really helpful because it's just blatant, but the anger is this very directed of, we don't want this anymore. We want something different. Okay, what do you want? So it can be very helpful in the moment. And in fact, that is a defense mechanism, right? It's like, it's helping. But when it's like any emotion, if it's the only thing operating all the time, anger in the body is going to be trigger your sympathetic nervous system. Your adrenal glands are going to kick off. You're going to have increased cortisol. Your heart rate's going to go up. Your blood pressure is going to go up. Your digestion's going to go down. So all these things, if you're living in this state of sympathetic arousal, you're going to end up with heart disease and die very quickly, because so it's not healthy. That state is good for fight, flight, freeze, right? It's the fight. It's good for a few seconds, but it's not how we should be living our lives. But it is how most men are living their lives, because they're living in fear of something else.
Yeah, that is a good point where you differentiate rage and anger. I feel like, especially like this last year and this year, we're having a lot of chaotic moments around the world, around the globe, like war and all that. And I can just feel like all these different people, they're having the rage over war and rage over the government and all that. For that, what's your take on, how to differentiate like to transmute their rage from either anger or action, like now?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on. I mean, I live in Oregon. We have, a pretty politically left-leaning state where our president has said that, we have wars going on in Portland, which is just, I think it's hilarious, actually. It's just funny because it's just not true. But that's not the point. What the point is like when it comes back to sovereignty and this immediacy. So people want to do anything but be with themselves. They do anything. They do meaning making. They find causes. They find anything that they can possibly do. They live life through taking pictures on their cell phone. They listen to podcasts instead of go out and live reality. They will do anything to not be here, to not be present. And finding causes that they can be angry at is doing that. And yeah, and it's going to be and you're going to get really depressed and you're going to get really upset if you start to think about how terrible the world is out there in all these different ways and how you really don't feel like you can do anything about it. I would agree. And I live in this world too, and I see the things going on, and they are atrocities. So I do ask myself, what can I do? And the best thing I can do is what I'm doing, is I become this neo-shamanic practitioner that I can help individuals heal. Because if I can help individuals heal, they'll help other individuals heal, and they'll help other individuals heal. And that is how I can actually make a difference in this world, is through the work I'm doing. So it's not going to be through, aligning myself with a cause and, hanging a flag upside down and stating how angry I am about everything. That's not gonna help people heal. I want to help people heal. So I've chosen a path that I can do that. Now, we can all help people to heal in different ways. You can help people to heal by, creating your art, by creating a podcast. You can help people, just by smiling at them every single day. If you work at a grocery store and you smile and say, hi, how are you doing? Or if you're going through a grocery store, you say to the people there, hi, how are you doing? And you smile at them, because that is how you can help people every single day. And you feel like you're actually making a difference, because you are. You might not be making a massive difference, but you're making a difference on each individual's level. And that's how we make change happen. Change happens through each one of us making a choice to make change, not through these movements that are out there beyond us. It has to happen inside. It has to be embodied, once again, inside of us before the change can move anywhere else.
Yes, beautiful said. The changes happens from within, from each one of us. Now I wanted to take a little bit back on the shadow work. I feel like a lot of people, like for me, until this day, even though I feel like I solve a lot of stuff, but like we're still young, and then we have a lot of stuff that probably
You're still
like
young. I'm like way older than you, so.
no, but anyways, we do feel like at some point, like wow, that trigger word, that shadow words, it's like never end. And I'm just wondering, like, what if like there are many ascended masters that's legendly in history they walk on earth, like do they have any shadow at all? Also, that a lot of people misinterpret shadow as something that's like evil, that's like we have evil thoughts onto other people or of ourselves. Can you help to explain it? And like, do those ascended masters have their shadow as well?
So two things. Yeah, be wary of the person that preaches love and light. That's why I'm like, embrace your darkness. This is, it's like, because I've just always been kind of a contrarian, but, so we want to stay away from the love and the light and the people that are just, everything's positive all the time. No, sometimes the world is shit and it sucks, and that's okay. That's just the way, so embrace that. Ask yourself, why does it suck? Why does this make you feel so terrible? That's the shadow. It's trying to show itself to you to help you. It's trying to make you better by giving you this pain as this gift so that you can see this is something that you need to work on. And instead we push it down and avoid it. And, does it ever end? probably not for us. Does it, when we get to the level where you ask about ascended masters? So once again, personal physical health. I'll do it this way: physical health, personal psychology, energetic psychology, soul psychology. At the soul psychology level, at this highest level, when we're talking about karmic debt and karmic loads, and beyond, and family karma and ancestral karma, beyond even our own karma, you have ascended masters are truly karma free. And when they are, the way that Christoph and Alea Melchizedek put this, and this is actually in the Neo-Shamanic Foundations, if you recall, the way they actually put this is that there is when you actually become, because karma is an actual energetic load in your system, it's physically inside you running the show, and it's holding you down in certain ways, and it's controlling your energy flow. When you become completely and utterly free of karma, you actually shift in energetic frequency to where laws of gravity no longer apply to you. So that's where you get ascended masters being able to perform these miracles that defy all of our physical laws, because they are no longer adhering to those physical laws. So is it possible? Yes. Are we doing it right? Or anyone doing it right now? I think Christoph said there's like 2 ascended masters on the planet right now, something like that, but there's more and more growing with this new movement of awakening that we are currently having, and there's more of a shifting towards that, and that's, I'm here today, and I'd love to get there in this life. Am I going to get there in this life? I don't know, but I'm going to keep on doing my shadow work so I can keep moving in that direction. That's my main goal.
Do you have any sort of encouragement for people, because doing all this shadow work all the time, worrying that, oh man, I have another trigger all the time. Like at some point, we would just start analyzing every little trigger. For me, sometimes I get tired of it. I feel like, oh, maybe that is just, one part of embracing my shadow is to, embrace it, to be with it. Like, what's your take on that? What would you say for those people who are just, sometimes we get tired of transmuting that all the time?
I play this balancing game too. It's over all the work I've done, it's like I'm still like trying to do more, and I'm all and it's tiring. But what I do a lot more recently is recognize, when I'm not triggered, and just be grateful and have gratitude in me that, oh, that didn't trigger me, and I'm literally a different person than I used to be, and people like me more now. I'm easier to get along with. I have an amazing relationship with my wife. I don't, we fight like once a year tops. I have,
Whoa. Mm.
and it's like I have these amazing relationships now because of the shadow work, and I have to recognize that. It's like, money falls into my lap, sometimes, which is nice. I'm getting clients without advertising because I don't like advertising. That's a pain and a lot of work. And so I have to recognize what we call the law of synchronicity is working in my favor. And because I'm walking down this path, that serves Mother, Father, God, and that is shadow work. And so recognizing that and remembering that is what gets me to continue to do the shadow work. I'd say I started doing deep shadow work. I've been doing shadow work off and on kind of, I'd say, for 10, 15 years, but this last year of 2025, the year before, you did, and I did some pretty deep shadow work. And it was one of the most painful years of my life. And it was one of the best years of my life. No, the best year of my life. I told my wife that. I said, I think 2025, despite all the things are going terribly wrong with the wars, with the chaos, 2025 was the best year of my life. And she's like, wow, yeah, cool. She's like, that makes sense. She's seen the change in me. So, that's the reason we do it. That is why. And we haven't really talked about this, but what happens when you do that work you have a magnetic field, and I wrote about this in one of my blog articles too, called Building the Bridge Between Two Worlds. You have a magnetic field, an electromagnetic field coming out of your heart. It is 45 to 70 times stronger than the one in your brain. Heartmath.org is an institute that has done plenty of research on this. This is not me making stuff up. This is documented, measurable effects. And the more shadow work you do, the more coherent your heart field becomes. And the more coherent it becomes, the stronger it emanates out this strength field, right? So you can think of frequency versus amplitude if you know anything about physics. You can be emitting the same frequency, but your amplitude actually increases, but as well. And so when you emit a great frequency and it's high in amplitude, that's what we call coherence. And what this means is when you walk around and you just come into contact with other people, you start changing them. You start actually getting their field in line with your field. And their field starts to entrain. And you know this. You know people that you can just be around and you're like, I feel better being around that person, or that person that has that magnetic personality that they walk into a room and everyone turns around and looks at them, right? These are people in high coherence. And if you think about that, by you just being in coherence, you walk around making other people better and helping them to get better and helping them to heal. I can think of nothing more rewarding than the fact that just by my pure existence alone, I am helping other people and making other people happier. So that's why I continue to do the shadow work, even though it seems like it never ends. And I can tell you it even gets more challenging. I've done a ton of shadow work and I'm going back to do the root again because I have these blocks right now and I can't figure out how to get past them. I don't know. I've been trying really hard. I've been doing everything in my power and I've learned a lot, and I'm still like, what are these blocks? And I know the blocks, they're old, they're ancient. I'm talking about ancient soul level, actually above soul level, over soul level, karmic blocks, karmic debts that I'm now starting to take on. And so, I'm ready for the next chapter.
Wow, amazing. So many questions, but I will start with for me, I'm a person who has already been on this journey of transmuting my shadow work, and I'm probably in the middle of it, just a little beginning of it. And I'm asking this question on behalf of maybe there are some more people there as this situation as well. So as we look into more and more shadow work, and I feel this clarity come online with me and discerning what I'm facing. So I have a lot of clarity and discernment on many situation, people, and things. And I kind of recognize them in a way where I understand that maybe everything interaction is already about like value exchange. What kind of value do you have for me? What kind of value can I contribute to you? So I recognize that. But then at the same time, I feel like if I'm looking at people or everything in this way, am I in a place where I have a lot of judgment, or am I feel like a little bit of far away from before I'm just like, oh, everything, we're all one, all love and light. And I was really in a love and light state where it's like I ignore all these different darkness of human being. So do you have any advice on people where, oh, we looking deep in the shadow, look at the shadow, we recognize that shadow, but then we're like, now we're thinking in a way where it's bring the shadow first and to look at it. What's your take on that?
Let me see if I got this right. So I want to approach this from the idea of, like you said, of a lot of times the shadow is the thing, whatever you're having a problem with. And so, how did somebody put this? I was on a forum, one of our forums, and they said, they were talking about how they were worried about dark forces being able to infiltrate their mind. Like, we're talking about, way out there stuff about like, these dark forces being able to control their mind. They're like, how do I defend myself against this? And I replied and I said, why do you think you need to defend yourself? And because that's the shadow. He's like, I'm afraid they're going to get in my mind and they're going to take over all this, they're going to take over and I need to defend myself and all this. And I'm like, really? And I said, that's your shadow. Your shadow is, why are you afraid in the first place? Why are you fearing these things? Why are you giving them the power to, why are you giving up your power and saying that something else out there is going to be able to control you? Why are you making yourself a victim? That's the shadow you need to work on. When you can stop being a victim, all that other stuff about these people that are mind controlling you or whatever doesn't matter anymore because it goes away because now you're sovereign. So your focus is not, how do I defend myself? Your focus is, why do I even need to defend myself? That's what it means to look at with the shadows. A great one, like you just said, is when you talked about value exchange. Value exchange implies that you are lacking something, right? If I'm immediately looking at a situation and saying, what can I get out of you? That implies that I am lacking something that I need from you. So there's the shadow. Why do you think you're lacking? Why do you think that you are incomplete? Why do you think that you need another person to make you whole and complete? That's the shadow that you need to be looking at. Does that make sense?
Can you elaborate even deeper or give a real life example?
I would say, I'm just pulling from my own life experience. I used to think everything was, I was raised, once again, going all the way back through our families, I was raised, and so were all of my brothers and sisters, that we were obligated to do everything. Every single action we had was a transaction for our survival. If you want to eat today, go out and do chores. If you want, well, I wouldn't say that. I was going to say, if you want love, go do something. But I never got love, period. But if you want to eat, go do chores. If you want a video game, you have to go work, and I will give you money, and something like that. When I was a kid, everything was a value exchange. Everything was, I have to do in order to live, in order to survive, every single thing. And I'll give you the best example. My brother drank himself to death. He died an alcoholic who drank himself to death because he truly believed that no matter what he did, he could not ever fulfill that value exchange. He always, no matter what he did, there wasn't enough, wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough for him. So he lived his life thinking every single thing had to be a transaction and that he had to get something. And I have the same thing. I've just transmuted it. That I have to get something out of every situation. The only reason to have a situation is to do it. So if I'm going to, and this is our society in a lot of ways, but like, if I'm going to be nice, if I'm going to hold the door open for somebody, I expect then that, that's not a good example. Let's see. I'm just trying to think.
Hold the door.
I'm just trying to think of value. So if I'm gonna do anything, like I was a teacher for a long time, and the way I looked at it was like, if I'm gonna teach, I expect to be, and this is great for everyone, I expect to be compensated for it, right? So because I need to be able to, rightfully so, I need to be able to pay for what I'm doing so I can live, so I can work. But then it becomes the only reason you're doing it is to be compensated. And now it becomes an obligation and a contract, an unspoken contract that you signed yourself up for. I've started, I'm working on Scorpion Creek Ranch right now. I've been working on it for 3 years to make this happen. And I've made virtually nothing. And because I'm not concerned about the money, I'm doing it because I'm complete inside. And I know that this is what I need to do to help humanity and help the world. So I have faith that someday, if I need money for something, it'll appear. but I'm not doing it as an obligation. I am complete in and of myself. I'm making that choice to do this for other people. I'm not doing it so I can get paid. You know, as soon as you go down that path, you've kind of lost your ability to be complete and your ability to be whole, and you're reliant on other people, and now you're no longer sovereign.
Okay, that's a great way to put it. Like how can we be aware of that is by knowing whether I am sovereign in this situation. If my action or whatever I do depends on whether they treat me nice, I'm not sovereign anymore. This
Right.
is in a victim mindset, right?
Yeah. I mean, look at our current easy one is like, you know, Facebook likes or Instagram follows, right? You know, it's like, so people, it's like they're obsessed with this number, and that's a value exchange. I did this thing and I want you to value this thing, because why? Why do you need that value from them? That's the shadow. What is it makes you want to post something, and if you don't get any posts, you're going to be unhappy with yourself because you're not successful. Where did that come from? Where did that idea of success come from? Who put that into your brain? How did you, and not who put that into your brain, what is the defensive mechanism that you developed so that you think that this is the only way that you will survive? And when you can start to break all that down and you realize it's useless and it doesn't make any difference, well, unfortunately, we wouldn't have any more Instagram. Shoot. But you know, but
We still
that's the
do.
only way. Yeah, but that's the way to break free. That's the way to become sovereign.
Okay. I feel like I'm in a state where I don't really care, but a lot of people probably in the same state as well. Like we don't really care, but society is telling us like, oh, okay, if you don't have that and you don't get tangible return like money and all that sorts to keep you alive. And then now we have to think about, okay, do we need money to survive? Yeah, obviously we do. So then how would you suggest people to break free from that? Eventually it all comes down to our survival mechanism.
Well, there is a leap of faith at some point, and trust that
Mm,
that Mother, Father, God has your back.
mm,
And what I mean by that is, and you know this as authenticity. People that are authentic naturally have followers. People listen to them. They don't have to do a lot of marketing, and yeah, and they just kind of, you know, like I said, this goes back to that heart math thing and this coherence. Like I have a client who has a lot of posts on Instagram, and the ones that are the most liked, the most popular, are when they are truly authentic. There's
mm,
all these lots of posts, and they're just, but it's interesting, right? That even authenticity transfers through this transmission through the digital interwebs, right? That they can be authentic, and that authenticity somehow goes through this camera lens out into the world, and people can pick it up. And those are the most popular posts. And those are the ones that are going to be the most successful. And those are the ones that are actually going to then probably garner some sort of revenue somewhere down the line, right? And it's authenticity. And that's what shadow work allows you to do, is it allows you to become authentic. So, you know, we see this, and unfortunately, you're right as well. There is a lot of, we are only at the beginning of this, this change, this move from the wounded masculine, the toxic patriarchy that has built and defined all this stuff, how we live our entire society. We're only at the very beginning of this movement away from that. And so you still see a lot of people doing all those things to be successful, you know, and to some degree it works. And I was in it for 10 years. I used to be in marketing. And I was all about marketing, and it's like, you know, and then I realized marketing are marketers to marketers for the sake of marketing, for marketing's sake. And I was like, wait, what? It's like everything was about marketing to marketers, about how their marketing product could make more people money, because this is the best marketing product for marketing. And it's like, no one was actually putting out a product or anything. And it was just like, this is ridiculous. And it was so inauthentic, and it made me feel so empty and hollow. And then I realized it's like, because you don't need marketing, you do need a little bit of like word of mouth and certain things to get the word out and people to share. You know, you got to put something out there. That's why I do put blog articles out there for people to read and say, I really identified with this and this is helping me. And then I'll share it with other people. But, you know, but the monster is still out there and it still works, but it's slowly dying. And it's not dying because we fight it. It's dying because the flame, the authentic flame, shines brighter.
Yes. And I recall my first year of getting into a corporate job where I I'm a I'm an Aries. So Aries means like I always be myself. I wanted to be myself. I don't want to pretend to be others. So my first year of that work, my manager wanted me to, like market myself to other colleagues and managers. So I feel like it's like sort of the concept that society has. And when you are saying likes of the post or the views, as long as you are authentic, that will attract most likes and views. What if the post, the video that I put out don't get the views or the likes? Does that mean I'm not authentic in that way?
There's two things. One, two, inauthentic. Two, we can't set time limits on when we want things. We cannot set time limits on when we want things. They're going to happen when they need to happen, not when we want them to happen. So I've put out things that, 10 years later, people are like, still respond, I get people responding to things and like, wow, this really helped me. Thank you. And I was like, oh, I wrote that like 10 years ago, so you never know. It's just, I find that's often the way the universe works. As I was joking with somebody, a client the other day, I was like, the universe hands you what you need seconds before you need it. And you're like, 3 months out, you're like, I need this, I got to do this, and then this is like, why am I not getting what I need? I need this right now. And the universe is like, you don't need that right now. You need to go eat something, and then you need to go and take care of this other thing. It's like, don't worry about that. You'll get it when you need it. And then like, and that's kind of how the universe is like, okay, 5 seconds before it happens, here it is. You can have it now. And you're just like, oh, really? Do I have to wait all the way up until the last second? Yes, that's the universe and divine timing. You have to trust that it knows better than you do how to orchestrate an infinite number of realities happening at the same time. So, it's that is truly what is, it's hard for the mind to fathom what God truly is. When you start to, and they came out with that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and people's minds were blown. And I was like, well, duh, what else do you think God could possibly be? God is everything, everywhere, all at once, all the time. There's another reality where we're having this exact conversation, and instead of a blue light on my camera, there's a red light, and everything's the same. And then there's another one where you have purple hair, and all the words are the same. And then there's one where one word is different. All of these realities could be happening at the same time, and it only takes, that is what true infinite means. And there is no way that our brains can possibly fathom how to orchestrate and coordinate all of these things all the time. So when we want things on our schedule, tough.
Yeah, very well said. Because like a lot of things, our mind, our little ego cannot wrap our heads around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
for sure.
so I wanted to ask you, I feel like there are a lot of people they still don't understand a lot about shadow work. Maybe they would have some understanding or interpretation around it. Do you have any clients ever come to you with the most common misinterpretation of shadow work or misunderstanding that you have to explain to them?
I think the easiest way to put it is one of two things. First, for the person that doesn't really even know what shadow work is, or anything, the way I would put it is, what is the outcome? Do you truly want things in your life to permanently change forever? If you want things to permanently change in your life, do shadow work. And like, okay, great. So if they're up for that, now you can explain what shadow work is. I would truly say that ultimately the only way you can truly change your behavior is to do shadow work. And, at a very, very, very fundamental level, I would say I'm still the same person, but my personality, actually, after the root, actually, when we came back from Egypt, not the root, when I came back from Egypt, my neighbor said, "You're not the same person." She just looked straight at me and said that. She's like, "You're you," but she's like, "You're not you anymore." She's like, "You're different." And, that was an example of I am me, but after Egypt, I was definitely different. So if you want to truly become a person, a person that you love more, a better person, then you do shadow work. Ultimately, what that looks like, it's interesting because people come to me and they're like, I want to be more successful in this, right? And how can you make me more successful in this? And I say to them, I can make you more successful. It might not be in what you think, because, the way I believe Einstein put it is that when we operate on this level, right, and we try to solve our problems on this level, we can't solve the problems. But when we raise ourselves to another level, the problems no longer exist, right? So that's what we do is people like, I have this problem, I want you to help me solve it. And I say, okay, I'm going to raise your vibrational consciousness to a new level, and that problem's just going to go away. We're not going to solve the problem. It's just not going to exist anymore. And so it's hard to explain to people that a lot of times that's what when we're really looking for something, we're not looking for, people like, oh, I want to make more money. It's like, do you? Or do you want to have more experiences? Do you want to help more people? It's like, if you want to help more people, then you want to help more people. You don't want more money. Money is what you think makes it possible for you to help more people. But what if you can help more people, and that brings you more joy and satisfaction than all the money in the world? And, and so it's ultimately understanding what your problems are, and when you move to higher levels of consciousness, how your problems just dissipate away.
Oh, you explained very well. For me, even though I am a Neo-Shamanic Foundation and I knew a little bit about shadow work, but coming from a second language person perspective, I can definitely understand you pretty well regarding to shadow work. And what about asking from a perspective of from me, my perspective of people who may have done shadow work in the beginning or in the middle phase, what would you suggest them in terms of, like, right now? I feel like I've done in a level where it's going well, everything is going well. I also don't want to sort of be too grounded of always looking at my shadow, always stick my head on the ground. Is there anything that you could remind them to get a little bit of balance? Like, I feel like flowing, having that feminine coming in chaos and flowing around, it's necessary in time, but not to flow too far away. But also keep the balance of, when we need to see the shadow, we see the shadow, we recognize it. But when we wanna, go up to a upper level, flowy level, let our creativity expand, we can do that. How would you suggest we to navigate that balance?
Hara.
Hara? Explain
Oh,
Hara.
I can't be done. So when we think about, literally, Hara is the energy line that runs through you, and it's connected into the center of the earth, your 13th chakra, and it's extending all the way into the heavens, into the void. It goes up through your higher self, through Mother, Father, God, and connects into the void, the unmanifest, where all creation comes from. So if you, right, you just said shadow work is kind of like getting down to the ground a lot of the time. And there is times where we need to reach to the heavens, and we need to think about being able to be connected in the heavens, reaching up for what we want, and focusing on, pulling this stuff down. And it's not going up there, it's reaching up there and pulling it down to us that we need to do. So if you try to disconnect from the ground and you go reach up there, you're going to be like, a kid holding onto a balloon, and your feet aren't going to be on the ground, and you're never going to be able to manifest anything because you're not here. You have to be here. That is what embodiment means. Embody means to make heaven come down through us. It is not that we go out up into heaven. Heaven comes down and we embody heaven inside us. Even Jesus Christ said that. He said the kingdom of heaven is inside all of us, right? It's not out there, it's in here. So the shadow work grounds us and keeps us firmly planted here. But simultaneously, not you are reaching up into the heavens, and you are asking to manifest and what you want in this reality and in this world, and you pull it down into your existence. But you need both of them happening at the same time. It's okay to reach up there and look for stuff as long as you stay grounded. So we always say it's like, and so we say this is Hara is it's not a metaphor. Hara is an energetic line that runs through you. It was funny. I went to a workshop a couple weeks ago called from the School of Clairvoyance called Awakening the Third Eye. I suck at that, evidently. You would have been great. I suck at the third eye stuff. But we're in this thing, and this woman says to me, she's like, you're grounded. She's like, but your grounding is going up too. She's like, I can see your ground, this light just coming all the way through you. It's like going up and down at the same time. She had no clue what Hara was, but she saw it. She could see it in me because I practice Hara every single day. I Hara for 30 minutes a day minimum, if not more. I am constantly practicing Hara. I am constantly rooting myself down into the center of the earth and reaching up to the heavens at the same time as much as possible. And like I said, it's not a metaphor. It's an actual meditation practice of pulling the energies from the earth and the heavens into my being. And we do that through breath and consciousness and attention. And it's not, like I said, it's not a metaphor. It's a real thing that you do. So.
Have you ever observed people who are like just too grounded? Like for you, like you grounded in a way where you can still reach the heaven line together. But maybe for people, they're just like disconnected.
I would say there's, Christoph says this, and I could say there's certain people that you meet, certain people you meet that have done a lot of men's work that can seem very cold and terse and triggering. Christoph says he's really triggering to a lot of people. And I can be triggering, and the people that we're triggering to are those that are ungrounded. So you won't find a grounded person caring if they're triggering other people. That's the thing. That's their problem. They're the ones that are ungrounded, and that's why they're so uncomfortable being around such grounded people, because they can't. There's no association. And once we said about that coherence, they can feel how weak their coherence is when they get around grounded people. So grounded people, truly very grounded people, can be quite triggering to some. But if it's triggering, it's you that you should be looking at. Once again, why am I being triggered? So no, as I get around more and more. Now, there's also just douchebags. That's different. Those aren't grounded. They're also very weak. In Hara, they're not grounded. That's just being an asshole. That's totally different.
So how can we distinguish whether they're just being asshole or whether we're just being triggered? There's a fine line difference, right?
Well, no, well, it's funny because like I know people that are, I know there's a lot of these machismo males out there, and and a lot of people think that they're really confident. I can listen to ads on, I stopped going on Instagram a while ago because it just made me sick of the inauthenticity of the ads. I can hear it in people's voices. I can tell just from the word. You could be saying complete and 100 truth. You can be like, it's 67 degrees outside today and the sun is shining, and I could hear the inauthenticity in your voice. As you become more grounded, you just start to, you pick up on people. It's on a deeper level than in your mind. It's on an experiential level that you start to understand people. On a frequency level, you hear them, you feel them in your body, you feel them where they connect in your body. Does it ring in your head or does it hit in your heart? Do you feel it in your stomach? You can feel it through the softness of their field. And so as you become more and more grounded, you start to be able to pick up on people as authentic or inauthentic. And one of the ones that was triggering at first, even over the last year, was how inauthentic people used to annoy me. or like upset me and offend me. Inauthentic people used to offend me, and now they maybe just kind of annoy me, but they don't offend me anymore. Because I don't think that they don't know that they think they're being authentic. They think they're really trying hard to change the world. And, and they put out these things and these ads, and the next great thing, this product is going to be the product that saves your life, like them and every other person on the planet has told them before, told us beforehand. They don't know that they're ringing with inauthenticity. I do. And it's okay. It's fine. They'll figure it out sometime. And if, and if they don't, maybe they'll want to start doing some shadow work.
Yeah, I feel like they are not even aware of their behavior until they get to the point where they deeply done some shadow work. Like before, I didn't even know that I was ungrounded until I become even more and more grounded. And of course, I'm still in the process of that.
Oh, from
So,
when I met you a year ago to now, uh, you are so much more grounded, and you're glowing. It's just like you have this aura about you that you always had a very gold, puffy lavender type thing going on with your high levels in your upper chakras, but you have a presence about you now that you didn't have before, that that has staying power.
oh my
So
God, I didn't expect to get this amazing compliment from you.
yeah.
And um, oh man, I want to get into a lot deeper, but like for you, I feel like you've done a lot of shadow work because I've asked different phases of people who at the beginner level before they come into shadow work, or in the middle intermediate level where I am. What about like advanced level of people who have done a lot of shadow work? Like for you, you were saying that you still wanted to work on some more for even decided to go root initiation this year. Even though you mentioned like the soul level and that, can you share or even share a little bit more on what kind of the shadow that you think you are dealing with, and what's your experience on that?
Well, from a shamanic perspective, right? We have ceremonies and we have rituals where we have to truly, fully envelop ourselves in an experience. Um, there's a level of shadow work that you can do on a day-to-day basis. That's great. If you want to go deeper and deeper, you're going to have to dedicate days to weeks to months to work on something. So for instance, the root initiation is, I'd say 2 to 4 weeks of preparation, of diet, of getting prepared, of journaling, of questioning. Then you'd go into this initiation for several days. And then, you have 3 months of more writing, of more tests that you have to face, of no caffeine, it's like these things like that. And so to get to these deeper, darker shadows, you have to put in a lot more time and effort. That's just the way it is, because you have to create an experience for your entire being, not just something that, oh, I want to journal on this for 20 minutes today. Like, you're not going to get that deep into things, which is why my meditation time has increased from 20 minutes to 40 minutes to 60 minutes, but also where I've also started to take on new types of, I'm constantly studying as well to go deeper into my shadows. So I started studying how to access my past lives. And I have multiple avenues of meditation now that I do know how to access my past lives. And, that's what we're going to try to do on our next shadow work call on Sunday. But, and it's like, I want to do this work and I want to learn more about how I can affect my soul level karma. I have to put in a lot more time and effort to get to that point. So, it just depends on, for most people, they're kind of at these beginning phases where they don't need a lot to get started. But once they get started and start understanding and they see the benefits, they're like, yeah, I want to do more. I want to do more. I want to continue to improve. And you get to the point, and there's shamanic experiences like just using the drum. Well, there it is. You can kind of see my drum. Just using the drum right there. And they will spend an evening where they're just chanting and using the drum, and they'll go into trance states, and they'll be able to leave their body and astral project and have these experiences where they do go to their past lives or they do experience other things. Do they do that every single night? No, that's a ceremony that takes time to prepare and time to go through, and it's the same thing. So how you access these experiences, I think there's so many different ways to do this, between breath work and different shamanic drummings and trance states and dreaming and medicine. These are all different ways to access deeper levels, and the more effort you put into it, the more you get out of it.
Amazing. I'm gonna need to probably ask you to come back later on in life to talk about your embodied education. I feel like that is another topic that I wanted to explore on what you do as well. With all that wrap up, I wanted to give you a space to share, like, what are you currently offering, or is there anything that at the end of the day you wanted to share with people who are interested in shadow work or changing their patterns?
There's a couple things. One, I am trying to put out blog articles that I've literally not seen anywhere else on the internet. I'm trying to put out this type of stuff that is my lived experience of these, and working with clients, what I see coming from clients, where I don't name them or anything. It's just their general experiences and kind of the things I keep on seeing over and over again as far as what the shadows are that come up. I see repeating patterns, and I'm like, oh, this is something to probably talk about because I'm seeing it over and over again. So the blog is one of those. We have a shadow work group that I started, a virtual shadow work group, and I'm more than willing to invite others to that. We'll be shutting it down this week for the summer because summer's just a hard time, but I do intend to jumpstart it back up, I think, in the fall, at which point I will also be doing a live shadow work group here out of my home, but that'll be, of course, in Eugene, Oregon. So unless you're in this area, that'll be a little bit hard. Like I said, at Burning Man, I'm going to be doing shadow work shops, and then next year at Conscious Growth Convergence again. I don't know if you want to come again, but I'm going to be doing workshops there as well.
Wow, crazy.
So, yeah. So, and then down the road, probably by next winter, we'll see, after I get these workshops, that'll give me enough idea where I'm going to start putting out like weekend retreats on shadow work. And it's not going to be just shadow work. It has to be the whole package. Let's call it shamanic healing, because sometimes you need to work through the physical stuff before we get into the shadow work stuff. So, there's no one right answer here. Every single person is different. So there's a lot of stuff coming up down the way between, the virtual shadow workshops, the blog articles, the shadow workshops. I do one-on-one sessions, and one-on-one sessions are great. Usually you're not going to get through it in one session. It's going to take 5 and 7 session packages, because it takes several to get through your physical blocks in your body, so that we can start to talk about the underlying issues that are controlling your life. So lots of different ways.
Cool. Where can the audience find the information?
My name is Domenic Weber. It's spelled Domenic, and my website is dominicweber.com. DominicWeber.com, just dominicweber.com. And you spell it wrong. So it's probably easy to spell wrong. Sorry about that. But that's the way my name is. Great thing is I got the domain. So so that's where my blog is. That's where you can learn more about if you want to try to find sessions. And I'll start posting stuff eventually on the shadow work group if people want to join in with that. And we just keep moving forward. And as well, also, I do want to do my quick plug. If you want to learn more about scorpioncreekranch.org, that's my school that we're building. So once again, scorpioncreekranch.org. That is where I am the director of education and building a new entire type of education system that we plan on. We're starting here in Eugene, but this is an education system that I'm not looking to take down the old education system. Once again, I'm not fighting a battle. I'm not fighting a war. The flame burns stronger than the falsities out there. And I'm just burning a strong flame of what true education is. And it will overcome all the different types of education systems out there. It may take hundreds of years, but it is the path forward.
Yeah, when you were describing earlier, that is kind of school I wanted to go to. Like, why do I have to learn all that stuff like before? Oh, so
What
yeah, thank
every
you
single
for.
parent says to me is like, wait, why isn't all school like this? And I said, because it's all part of the system. And I refuse to participate in that system. So
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I will put the link down below your own personal website and the school that you are putting it out for people to access to it. And what would you want people to know about, like on your new school?
we're in the process of there's several different things. If you believe in the cause, if you believe in what we're doing, I truly believe that homelessness, I'm going to understand that homelessness is a shadow of our entire society. Everyone in this country, probably the same in Canada. I mean, I saw in New Zealand is we're seeing more and more homelessness, and homelessness, COVID exacerbated it, but it was around before that. And I do believe that this is a shadow that needs transmutation. And that's what we're doing. We're going to transmute the shadow of homelessness, and we're going to eradicate homelessness, not by kind of getting rid of it, but we're going to take these kids that are the least fortunate and turn them into people that want to change the world. And if you believe in this idea, if you believe in this cause and this mission about transmuting homelessness from this eyesore in society to being something that can actually help grow and heal all of our communities across the country, then we do ask you to become a donor at $10 a month to become a sustaining member. Or you can donate in other ways or volunteer. There's lots of different ways to get involved. But that is our number one thing right now is we're asking people to become donors at $10 a month if they believe in this cause. And so many people have been, just like you said, they're like, wow, I wish I had education like this. Wow, this makes a lot of sense. Why aren't we doing this? I don't, because we just thought of it. That's why we're only starting to do it now. But that, we got started. So let's do it.
Yeah, and I feel like homeless is definitely one of the topic most people don't want to really talk about it.
Oh, of course not. It's a
Yeah,
dark shadow.
and it is. And like, for me, I didn't know that there are actually kids that really suffer from that, maybe homeless parents. The work that you've done not only contribute and helping those kids, I feel like it's bringing a lot of awareness to people who, like, because we don't really have a lot of information or knowledge towards that, and we don't really know how can we contribute except for looking away from it. And I feel
Right.
like that is one of the way to start getting to know more about it, understand, learn about it, and understand how can we contribute on that
No,
aspect.
it's a huge part. It's like every day when we talk to people, they're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And the kids that we're dealing with, 14 to 18, they're assumed that they're with their parents, but then when they don't have parents, they're assumed they're not allowed to be adults. So they literally don't exist in the eyes of the government. The government says either you're with your parents or you're an adult. And we're like, no, that's not the case. These are 14 to 18-year-olds that aren't in either of those scenarios. And they say, well, that doesn't actually exist. So you don't ever hear about it because the government's decided that doesn't actually happen. And the sad fact of it is it does. And it's interesting because what is the emotion that you just said we don't want to hear about homelessness is shame. We feel
Yes.
shame when we look on the streets and we see these people. We feel shame that we didn't do something about it. This is a dark, dark shadow that our nation has to address. So we are addressing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking that's such a courage move to do it, and to even like to face deep in the shadow and to even become a shadow work facilitator to support people who wanted to be brave enough to go on this kind of journey.
Thank
And
you.
last but not least, we're coming to the end. I have only two ending question for you. First one is, what is your take on demon is also at God's service?
It's a weird question. How do I put this? God created free will. So God gave us the ability to make all of our own choices, and that even includes the demons. So I guess that's how to answer that simply. I know it's very, sorry, simple answer.
But I mean, because we're doing a lot of shadow work, we're seeing the society acting on this different other way of, war, and one side is victim side and one side is perpetrator. And maybe that perpetrator is actually, demon. And, but a lot of people would say that, oh, demon is also at God's service. So we should just look at it as a neutral way.
Oh, if you want to put it this way, I'm going to rephrase the entire answer here for you.
Okay.
We all experience what's called the victim-victimizer consciousness. That is to say that we fluctuate from being the victim to being the victimizer. My own shadow in this world would be unworthiness and self-righteousness, and self-entitlement. Unworthiness and self-entitlement. So we live in polarities. And that's my main polarity that I've had to deal with my whole life, is feeling totally and utterly unworthy, and then being totally self-entitled that I'm right. I'm the one who knows how to do everything. Everyone else doesn't know how to do anything, just kind of like your dad, right? And so I have both of these living inside me at the same time. There's the angel and the demon, however you want to put it. We all have these polarities rolling through us. Another big, huge one for me that I've talked about is being the betrayer and betraying. That is, to say, or abandoning, getting a fear of abandonment. A lot of us have abandonment issues, and then we go around and we betray and abandon somebody. So, we have these victimizer states inside of us. And one of the aspects of shadow work is what we call polarity integration. And we learn how to integrate both these things. We don't get rid of one and we don't get rid of the other. We integrate them into one. And then a new thing arises out of them. You have this new amount of energy that you've never had before. When you collapse these two things that you've been holding down with all this energy and they become one, your level of vibration, your whole entire level of being elevates, and you're literally lighter and freer, and you're acting out of a different kind of level all around. It's great.
Yeah, integration is definitely what I've been trying to do as well on my end of our plurality. And also that recently I've heard some channel remote viewer mentioning that it's actually that we needed to not give the consent to that side, but also to focus on ourselves, on whichever reality we wanted to choose, which is like our state of being, what kind of state of being that we wanted to choose. So yeah, I think it's another grand topic to explore.
This goes all the way back to, this is way beyond anything here, but it's the Taoist philosophy of yin yang, right? Like we have these laws of polarity. We always have, male, female, sun, moon, yin, yang, light, dark. And the purpose in Taoism is not that there's one or the other. It's always about the integration of the two of them. And, I practiced a different technique from a man called his name was Zhivarod Slavinsky, and he created what's called spiritual technology. And he really was very deep into the Taoist philosophy, and really worked a lot with polarity integration. That's a whole other topic. It's a great topic. It's part of shadow work, but it's not the only part of shadow work.
Awesome. Yeah, we can probably next time bring you on for another deeper conversation on plurality, because the world might need that, a lot of integration through our
it's pretty polarized
sharing.
right now, right? Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So last question is that what is that one thing you can suggest anyone to create mind and heart coherence?
Once again, Hara. I just recently put up a YouTube video, and I don't know how you'll find it because I really don't market these things. It's on how to do Hara. And
I'll put the link down below. I'll get the link from you.
Yeah, and how to do Hara, because when you learn how to do Hara, you literally go to heartmath.org if you want to learn more details about how this all works. But when you perform Hara, you actually increase your heart coherence. And when you increase your heart coherence, you literally increase your overall coherence in this world. You increase your coherence in yourself, you increase coherence in other people, you increase coherence in your relationships. Everything happens through Hara.
Wow, thank you. That's the greatest practice that I learned as well. Yeah. Thank you, Domenic, for today's sharing. And I've learned so much from you. And I feel like there are so many more of your journey I wanted to have a deep conversation with you on. And but this time I will thank you for now. And thank you for the audience. If you stay until the end, feel free to explore down below the description. And we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you.